Good morning and welcome to today's session of Moments with Clara. Today is part 3 of talking about when grief returns, it often returns with a vengeance. In the first 2 parts, we talked about what grief is, why it does return, and that we are normal to expect it to return. And today we'll talk about one more reason why the grief returns and what we can possibly do to prepare a little bit for this type of returning grief. We know that there are anniversaries that come up, there are special dates, there are things that remind us really vividly and painfully that our child is not here. Weddings, graduations, birthdays, anniversary dates of when our child died, when our child was born. The birth date and the death date are 2 that just trigger so many emotions. And on we go. We think, what would life be like if my child had lived long enough to get married? Would my child have children? What would my grandchildren look like? Would we have vacation together? What job would my child have? And on and on we go. And we can pretty much, understand why grief returns during moments when we're thinking like that. Now, what can we do that will help us? One thing I've found is to not dwell too intensely on the what ifs. The what ifs will never be answered. We will never know. Never, ever will we know, not in this life. My son died very unexpectedly, right in the prime of his life. 42 years old, happily married, 3 beautiful children, planning, wonderful things, vacations together, a 20th year wedding anniversary, things like that. And then suddenly life changed. Well, we can drive ourselves nearly to the brink of craziness, wondering what would life have been like if he continued to live. It's pointless to do that to ourselves. It's like beating ourselves up over and over and over again. Do I ever wonder about these things? Of course I do. Of course I do. But I caution myself not to fall into that deep hole where I can't claw myself out anymore. I'm never going to know what would have been, ever, and neither are you. What helps is to focus on what we had. Now, many of you can say, well, I only had my child briefly, or I only had my child for 5 years, or my child was a teenager when my child died. And those things are horrible. They're all horrible. To lose a child at any age is horrific. That's cutting our child's life far too short, and we never, as parents, will feel we had our child with us long enough. Never, ever. What we can do, though, is to focus on what we had with our child, those moments with our child. I just did some reminiscing last night before bed. I found a menu of my son's, a broccoli rice menu that he had submitted in first grade. His teacher made a cookbook for parents, and there was this broccoli rice casserole recipe. Now, he hated broccoli and rice at that time in his life, hated it, absolutely. And the funny part was he wanted a recipe that he knew other parents would be so excited about. So he said, and I can just picture him, Mom, pick a recipe that's really good. That's the one I want to bring in. And so we did the broccoli and rice and cheese casserole. It's a favorite of mine. It's a favorite of our families to this day. And rather than stop eating that recipe or sit down and wonder what if and why and would he like that recipe today? Would his children like it, or on and on? Rather, it's better to let that recipe bring joy into my life. And that's what I did last night. I just smiled over and over again. I picture him as a little boy going into his classroom with that recipe and being so proud when he came home with that little recipe book that I still have. And thankfully I kept it. And he just kept saying, everybody's moms love that. They love that recipe. What a fun thing for me to remember. Now, I could have gotten bogged down in the heartache of saying, yes, but he's not here. But I chose instead to remember the life that I lived with him. It was a great life. He was a great kid. He was a great young man. He was full of zest and life and wonder for everything. Remember your child in those good moments. Make sure that you thumb back through the files of your memories and bring something forward that is pleasant and fun and exceptional about your child. And every child has those exceptional moments. Remember those things, and your heart will feel more content. I promise you. I promise you that it will help. And during those grief times when grief comes back and hits us hard, make a concerted effort to remember the fun, the good, the happy, the pleasant hours, months, years that you had with your child. Allow those things to give you comfort during those heavy times of grief. I hope these few minutes together have been an encouragement to you. Beginning with our next session of Moments with Clara, we'll start a new topic and we'll continue on. And thank you for your comments. As always, it is always my prayer that these little few minutes together will give you some encouragement. I wish you a softer day in your grief today, and I'll sign off with love to you from Clara.